For more than 60 years, the world learned how to read silence by watching Clint Eastwood. He rarely explained himself. He didn't soften his edges for applause. He didn't chase affection. He stood, spoke when necessary, and let the weight of restraint do the rest. That is why, when news spread that Clint Eastwood had shared what many are calling a final message to his fans, the reaction wasn't panic. It was something quieter, something heavier, a collective pause. This wasn't a farewell tour. There was no dramatic announcement, no swelling music, no stage goodbye. Instead, it arrived the way most truths do at the end of a long life. Plain, measured, and impossible to ignore once you hear it. And that is precisely why it hurt. Eastwood's message was not about death. It was about time, about the slow, undeniable realization that the world keeps moving forward, whether or not it still recognizes the people who built it. For a man who defined entire eras of cinema, first as the cold-eyed gunslinger, then as the hardline enforcer, and later as the reflective storyteller, this moment wasn't about legacy in the abstract. It was about relevance, exhaustion, and the courage to stop explaining himself to a culture that no longer listens the same way. What made the message heartbreaking wasn't what he said, but what he didn't need to say. There was no bitterness, no resentment toward younger generations, no demand for respect. Instead, there was an acceptance that felt almost unsettling. Eastwood spoke about continuing to work for as long as he could, not because he had something left to prove, but because work had always been his way of staying honest. When that ended, he implied he would simply step away. To longtime fans, that implication landed like a quiet blow. Because Clint Eastwood was never supposed to step away. He was supposed to be permanent. A fixed landmark in Hollywood. A reminder of a time when characters didn't ask for forgiveness and stories trusted the audience to think. The idea that he sees an ending, even calmly, forces people to confront something they've avoided for years. Legends age too, and they do it out of the spotlight. There's another layer to this message that cuts even deeper. Eastwood represents a philosophy of filmmaking and masculinity that no longer dominates the conversation. His characters were often flawed, morally ambiguous, sometimes wrong. They didn't deliver speeches explaining themselves. They acted, lived with consequences, and moved on. Today's cultural climate demands clarity, disclaimers, and constant self-justification. Eastwood never adapted to that. He didn't fight it either. He simply kept making films his way. In his final message, there's a sense that he understands he now belongs more to history than to the present. That realization carries a unique kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being forgotten, but the loneliness of being remembered differently than you remember yourself. Eastwood knows that many younger viewers encounter his name through controversy summaries, simplified labels, or recycled debates rather than through the quiet power of his work. And he seems to have made peace with that. That peace is what hurts. Fans expected defiance. They expected anger at being misunderstood. Instead, they were met with acceptance. Eastwood did not ask to be defended. He did not ask to be reinterpreted. He simply acknowledged that the world changes and that no artist, no matter how influential, gets to freeze it in place. There is also an unmistakable weariness beneath the calm. Not physical frailty, but emotional fatigue. The fatigue of watching conversations repeat themselves. The fatigue of seeing nuance disappear. The fatigue of knowing that silence, once powerful, is now often mistaken for guilt or indifference. Eastwood's message suggests that he no longer feels compelled to correct those assumptions. That chapter, for him, is closed. For fans who grew up with his films, this realization feels personal. Clint Eastwood wasn't just an actor or a director. He was a reference point. His presence reassured audiences that some values, discipline, restraint, self-reliance, still had a place in storytelling. Hearing him acknowledge that his time in the center is ending feels like losing more than a celebrity. It feels like losing a language. And yet, the message is not tragic in the traditional sense. There is no collapse, no scandal, no public unraveling. This is a different kind of ending, a dignified one, Eastwood is not being pushed out. He is choosing stillness over noise. That choice, in a world addicted to constant visibility, is radical. The heartbreak comes from recognizing how rare that choice is, and how final it feels. There is a moment in every long life when effort quietly becomes negotiation, not with the body alone, but with relevance, patience, and the energy required to keep standing in a world that no longer waits. For Clint Eastwood, that moment did not arrive with illness or scandal. It arrived with something far more subtle and far more painful. It arrived with the realization that silence, once his greatest strength, now required defense. For decades, Eastwood's restraint was interpreted as confidence. He didn't clarify his politics in every interview. He didn't reshape old work to match new expectations. He trusted audiences to sit with discomfort, to recognize that moral complexity was the point. That trust was reciprocated for a long time. Then, slowly, it wasn't. The world began to demand explanations for things that were never meant to be explained. Characters once understood as flawed became case studies. Stories once praised for ambiguity were reframed as statements. And Eastwood, who had spent a lifetime refusing to over-explain, found himself increasingly surrounded by conversations he never agreed to enter. What makes his final message so heavy is not that he feels rejected, but that he no longer feels obligated to correct the rejection. That shift marks a psychological turning point. It's the difference between fighting to be understood and choosing peace over precision. For a man whose career was built on control, of tone, of narrative, of self, that surrender is profound. Behind the public calm is a private erosion that few people see. Eastwood has outlived nearly all of his contemporaries. Directors who once challenged him, actors who once shared the screen, executives who once shaped the industry. Most are gone. The Hollywood he navigates now is populated largely by people who grew up watching him, studying him, or debating him in classrooms. That inversion alone creates distance. Imagine carrying a lifetime of lived experience into rooms where history is theoretical, where your work is dissected through frameworks that didn't exist when it was made, where your refusal to comment is interpreted as evasion rather than discipline. This is not hostility. It is dislocation. And dislocation, over time, becomes lonely. Eastwood's message hints at that loneliness without naming it. He speaks of continuing to work as long as he can, not because he fears stillness, but because work remains the last place where the rules haven't changed on him. On set, clarity still matters. Decisions still carry weight. Silence still communicates intent. In that space, he is not an artifact. He is present. But even that sanctuary has limits. Age narrows the margin for error. Energy becomes finite. The patience required to shepherd a film from idea to release increases as the cultural noise around it grows louder. Every project now arrives preloaded with expectation, interpretation, and judgment. For someone who values process over performance, that environment is exhausting. This is where the heartbreak deepens. Clint Eastwood is not retreating because he has nothing left to say. He is retreating because the conditions required for saying it honestly are disappearing. His final message reflects an understanding that the gap between intention and reception has grown too wide to bridge without distortion. Fans sense this intuitively. They hear not a goodbye, but a recalibration. A man acknowledging that the center of gravity has shifted and that standing outside of it does not diminish what came before. Yet emotionally, that knowledge lands hard. Because if someone as foundational as Eastwood can be edged toward the margins by time alone, then permanence itself feels like an illusion. There is also guilt embedded in the audience's reaction. Many fans realize, perhaps too late, how much they relied on his presence. How his continued output allowed them to believe that certain values, patience, moral ambiguity, restraint, were still secure. His message removes that reassurance. It forces a reckoning. These qualities survive only if others carry them forward. Eastwood does not offer instructions for that transition. He does not anoint successors. He does not frame himself as misunderstood. He simply steps back, leaving space where his voice once was. That absence is the message. In HLLW terms, this is the wound beneath the legacy. Not the fear of being forgotten, but the acceptance of being contextualized. Clint Eastwood understands that history will not freeze him in his preferred frame. It will reinterpret him, argue with him, reduce him in places, elevate him in others. And he has chosen not to intervene in that process. That choice demands a kind of courage rarely discussed. It is easier to fight misinterpretation than to live with it. Easier to correct the record than to trust time. Eastwood's final message suggests that he has reached a point where trust, once placed in audiences, has been transferred to history itself. And so the story continues, not toward an ending, but toward quiet. A quiet filled with work done, words withheld, and a legacy strong enough to withstand distance. As Clint Eastwood steps back from the front lines of modern cinema, his absence forces the world to reckon with more than just his exit from filmmaking. His legacy, already etched into the cultural fabric, now stands as a reminder of a time when stars weren't made of social media posts or viral moments. They were forged in silence, conviction, and the heavy burden of consistency. But in the 21st century, silence has a different meaning, one that is often misunderstood and undervalued. Clint Eastwood's decision to stop explaining himself, to stop fighting for understanding in an ever-shifting cultural landscape, speaks to a deeper truth about the modern judgment of old legends. His films, his characters, and his very persona were defined by a code of ethics that now feels foreign in the context of today's hyperconnected, image-driven world. His refusal to be redefined by the cultural currents of the moment challenges the very notion of legacy in an era where even the most celebrated icons must constantly adapt to stay relevant. For Eastwood, however, adapting to the whims of modern culture was never part of the equation. His work was about a quiet strength, about understanding the nuances of human flaws without needing to apologize for them. His characters were morally ambiguous, often making decisions that forced audiences to question their own beliefs. It was a way of storytelling that asked for patience and trust from the viewer, a stark contrast to the immediate gratification demanded by today's fast-paced media landscape. This tension between Eastwood's timeless approach and the modern hunger for constant engagement is perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of his final message. As the world shifts toward a culture that values constant visibility over authenticity, the very qualities that made Eastwood an icon, his introspection, his restraint, his unapologetic stance, are slowly being overshadowed by the noise of the present. In many ways, Eastwood's exit from the public eye can be seen as a protest against the relentless scrutiny of the modern era. The man who built his career on stoic performances and careful direction now finds himself in a world that demands an explanation for every silence. This is not a silence born of indifference, but a silence that carries the weight of decades spent crafting films and characters that spoke for themselves. Yet, in a time when every thought, action, and statement is analyzed and dissected in real time, such a silence can be misconstrued. There's an irony here. Eastwood's career was built on crafting characters who spoke less and did more. But in the age of social media and constant media cycles, doing less seems like doing nothing. As his contemporaries, from directors to actors, have embraced the platforms that allow them to maintain relevance, sharing behind-the-scenes glimpses, interacting with fans, making their lives public, Eastwood chose a different path. He understood the power of absence, of leaving something unsaid, and in doing so, he created a legacy that allowed his work to speak louder than any self-promotion could. But today's audience, conditioned by constant interaction and public-facing celebrities, struggles with this absence. Eastwood's refusal to engage in the digital dialogue that shapes today's cultural discourse may be interpreted as aloofness or detachment, when in reality, it was his way of maintaining integrity in a world where it's increasingly difficult to separate the art from the artist. Eastwood wasn't just creating films. He was constructing a way of being that rejected the necessity of validation. And yet, in doing so, he made himself the subject of scrutiny from a world that wasn't content to leave him in peace. The result is a paradox. Clint Eastwood, the man who spent a career giving audiences iconic performances without ever explaining himself, now finds himself more misunderstood than ever. As he steps away from the limelight, his final message is a stark reminder that sometimes the things we cherish most, silence, solitude, and the refusal to conform, are the very things that society struggles to appreciate in an era of noise and spectacle. The heartbreak, then, lies not in his exit but in the world he's leaving behind. A world where the icons of old are often pushed aside in favor of new voices, new faces, and a new way of doing things. The values that Eastwood stood for, patience, discipline, strength of character, are slowly being replaced by a culture that values speed, visibility, and the constant need to be heard. In that context, Eastwood's quiet retreat feels like the loss of something invaluable. The art of waiting, of letting a moment pass without filling it with unnecessary words. Yet, perhaps this is what makes Eastwood's legacy so enduring. In an era where many stars are consumed by the very systems that make them famous, Eastwood managed to sidestep that fate. He never allowed himself to become a product of the culture he helped define. His final message is not an admission of defeat, but an acknowledgement of the inevitable. He is choosing to step away, not because he has nothing left to say, but because the world he once knew has shifted in ways that no longer align with his values. As the final chapter of his career closes, the world must reckon with the fact that Clint Eastwood is one of the last of a dying breed, an artist who carved his own path, who stood firm in his convictions, and who never once asked for permission to be himself. The absence left behind by his departure is not just the loss of a man, but the loss of an entire way of making art, living life, and engaging with the world. His films will continue to be watched, discussed, and admired, but the quiet power he embodied, both on and off the screen, will be harder to find in a world that increasingly demands the opposite. Eastwood's silence, once a defining characteristic of his persona, will now become the defining characteristic of his absence. As his final message lingers, fans are left to reflect not only on the man he was, but on the values he represented, values that will continue to echo long after he has stepped away from the spotlight. The final message Clint Eastwood shared with his fans echoes much deeper than just an actor's retirement or a director's farewell. It reverberates through the way we understand legacy in an age where culture is ever-evolving, yet increasingly forgetful of the values that once defined it. Clint Eastwood, by choosing silence, by stepping away when so many expected him to cling to the limelight, is teaching us something far more profound than we are often willing to admit. In his absence, Eastwood is not fading from public consciousness in the way that many past legends have. Rather, his exit creates a void that cannot be filled by just another actor or director. This space reflects a larger, more significant shift in the entertainment industry, in the world at large, where the demand for constant visibility often overshadows the true essence of a creative artist's work. Clint Eastwood's career was always about restraint. In an industry notorious for its rapid cycles of hype and scandal, Eastwood was the antithesis. He wasn't about the flash, the drama, or the noise. Instead, he anchored his films in the quiet spaces, those still moments between words, the pensive gaze of a character that spoke louder than 100 lines of dialogue. His films weren't just about telling stories. They were about allowing those stories to breathe, giving the audience time to reflect, to think, and to make their own judgments. This was a radical choice in an era that increasingly demanded the quick fix, the immediate impact, and the soundbite to go viral. And yet, as we find ourselves in a world obsessed with short-form content, constant updates, and instant gratification, Clint Eastwood's work stands as a reminder of what we've lost. We live in an age where attention spans are shortening, where every film, every moment, Every celebrity is fighting for a piece of the ever-shifting cultural zeitgeist. And in this fight, the quiet, reflective artist is often drowned out by the noise of the modern world. In many ways, Eastwood's departure from the public eye reflects this very conflict. He could have stayed. He could have continued directing, producing, or appearing in the public sphere to maintain his relevance. The industry would have welcomed him back at any time, eager for a Clint Eastwood film to command box office attention or political discourse. Yet, Eastwood understood something many today seem to forget: that true legacy isn't built on constant appearances or on the pursuit of relevance. True legacy is about what you leave behind. It's about the way you make people feel when you step away. And in that, Eastwood's silence becomes his loudest statement. Clint Eastwood understood that as much as the world had changed, his role in it had not. What he stood for, what his work represented, was timeless. The discipline, the moral ambiguity, the unspoken strength. These are the things Eastwood championed throughout his career. In stepping away, he makes it clear that these qualities don't need the world's approval. They stand on their own in the quiet reflection of his work. But this too highlights the heartbreak of his departure. We live in a time when the power of social media and digital platforms often dictates the value of an artist. In this new world, Clint Eastwood, the man who changed the course of cinematic history with a few quiet glances and subtle performances, may be misunderstood or misrepresented. His films, once the embodiment of a particular ethos, are now filtered through lenses that demand context, backstory, and explanations. For an artist who thrived in ambiguity, this new world might seem like an impossible one to navigate. Yet, in his final message, Eastwood seems to have reconciled with this truth. He is not stepping away in anger or frustration. He is stepping away with dignity, with a quiet acceptance that his time has passed in this sphere. His films, like his characters, were not designed to answer every question. Instead, they were designed to make us think, something that, in the hustle of today's media environment, is often forgotten. Eastwood's films asked us to sit with discomfort, to question our assumptions, and to confront the complexities of human nature. They did not ask for easy answers, and they certainly did not ask for validation from the crowds. This is why his absence now is so powerful. Clint Eastwood is one of the few remaining figures in Hollywood who was not born from the media circus. He was not constructed through PR stunts or brand-building exercises. His legacy is not the result of a carefully curated public persona. It is the result of decades of hard work, of films made with purpose, of a man who refused to compromise on his values, no matter how much the industry changed around him. And perhaps, more than anything, Eastwood's exit should force us to reconsider how we measure success and legacy in the modern world. Is it based on how often we appear in front of camera? Is it about the number of followers we accumulate or the number of likes we receive? Or is it about the depth of our work, the integrity we bring to our craft, and the lasting impact we leave behind? As Clint Eastwood steps away, he leaves us with a final lesson. Legacy is not measured by noise, but by the silence that remains after you're gone. The Hollywood he helped shape may no longer exist in the same way. The values he upheld may feel out of step with today's culture. But in the end, Clint Eastwood's work will continue to resonate because it carried with it a truth that transcends time. Strength is found in restraint, and greatness is measured by the impact you leave, not the attention you chase. As Clint Eastwood's career culminates with his quiet exit from the public eye, his legacy is no longer just about the films he directed or the roles he played. It has become a beacon for filmmakers, actors, and creatives alike who seek authenticity in a world that increasingly values spectacle over substance. His final message serves as a quiet declaration that artistry, when done with conviction, doesn't require the constant validation of the industry or the public. Today's filmmakers and stars have often built their careers around social media posts, viral moments, and carefully crafted narratives that keep them in the spotlight. Yet Clint Eastwood's approach has always been a stark contrast to this model. He never sought attention for attention's sake. His films were never about courting approval or the latest trends. They were about telling stories in their purest form, with characters who weren't necessarily likable, but who were undeniably human. It's easy to dismiss Eastwood's work as old-fashioned or out of touch in a world that demands constant relevance. However, his films have stood the test of time precisely because they challenge the audience to think critically about the world around them. From the rugged moral dilemmas in Unforgiven to the quiet determination of Gran Torino, Eastwood's characters reflect a world that isn't neatly packaged into clear-cut good and evil. Instead, they explore the grays in between, the complexities of human nature that refuse to be simplified. For modern filmmakers, Eastwood's career is a reminder of the power of restraint. In an era where movies are often judged by their ability to entertain and captivate immediately, Eastwood's work offers something more lasting. His films demand patience and a willingness to sit with discomfort. In a world of fast-paced narratives and CGI spectacles, Eastwood's movies stand apart by insisting that audiences engage with the characters on a deeper level. It's a slow burn that, when done right, leaves a more lasting impact than any instant gratification can provide. What makes Clint Eastwood such an enduring influence is his ability to create stories that speak to universal truths. His characters are often loners, misfits, or people standing on the margins of society, yet they carry with them a sense of honor and integrity that resonates deeply with audiences. The violence in his films is never gratuitous. It's a necessary part of the world he portrays, a reminder of the consequences of actions and decisions. His characters are often at odds with the world around them, yet they persist, driven by a sense of duty or personal responsibility that resonates beyond the immediate context of their stories. Eastwood's influence is seen in the filmmakers who came after him, many of whom have tried to emulate his quiet, deliberate style. His impact can be felt in the works of directors like Christopher Nolan, who, like Eastwood, excels at building tension through subtlety rather than relying on flashy special effects. His influence is seen in the way modern directors handle themes of masculinity, morality, and the human condition. Eastwood's films are often about the complexity of being human and how personal choices can have profound, irreversible consequences. This theme is just as relevant today as it was when Eastwood first began making films. Moreover, Eastwood's work continues to inspire actors who seek to portray characters that are rich in nuance and complexity. The performances in Eastwood's films are often understated, but the impact is immense. Actors like Morgan Freeman, Hilary Swank, and Matt Damon have found themselves part of Eastwood's cinematic universe, where the characters they portray are less about delivering lines and more about embodying deep, personal struggles. Eastwood's films offer actors the opportunity to explore the very essence of their characters, something that doesn't happen as frequently in today's franchise-driven film industry. In the modern Hollywood landscape, where franchises and blockbusters dominate, Eastwood's legacy serves as a reminder of the power of individual storytelling. His films are not tied to any particular genre or trend. Instead, they are universal in their appeal, able to reach audiences across generations. Whether it's the gritty westerns of the good, the bad, and the ugly, or the thoughtful dramas like Million Dollar Baby, Eastwood's films transcend time because they tap into the timeless themes of human nature, morality, and the complexity of life. His career has spanned decades, and as his influence on modern cinema continues to grow, Eastwood's departure from the industry serves as a reminder that greatness is often achieved not through flashiness, but through consistency, honesty, and a refusal to compromise on one's artistic vision. For filmmakers and fans alike, the end of Eastwood's career is not a moment of sorrow, but an opportunity to reflect on the kind of art that lasts. It's a call to return to the values that made cinema such a powerful medium in the first place: authenticity, integrity, and a commitment to telling stories that matter. As Eastwood steps away, he leaves behind a body of work that will continue to inspire and challenge generations of filmmakers, actors, and moviegoers. His films are not just entertainment. They are invitations to reflect on the world around us, to confront uncomfortable truths, and to engage with the complexity of the human experience. His final message to his fans is a fitting end to a career that was never about the accolades, but about the work itself. In a world where so many are clamoring for attention and approval, Clint Eastwood stands as a beacon of a different path, one where silence is not empty, but full of meaning. As we reflect on his legacy, we are reminded that the true measure of an artist's impact is not in how often they appear in the spotlight, but in the lasting effect they have on the world. And Clint Eastwood's impact will endure, not because he demanded it, but because his work spoke for itself, quietly, powerfully, and without apology. As Clint Eastwood steps into the quieter chapters of his career, his influence on modern filmmaking continues to resonate, even in his absence. What remains clear is that his legacy is not simply etched in the films he created, but in the very ethos that permeated his approach to cinema. Today's filmmakers may find themselves following a vastly different landscape, dominated by digital platforms and global franchises. But Eastwood's approach to storytelling serves as a reminder that true artistry is timeless. One of the most significant aspects of Eastwood's legacy is the authenticity he brought to his work, a quality that is increasingly rare in an era where commercial interests and social media influence often drive creative decisions. Throughout his career, Eastwood carved out a space where his films were not made to please the masses or jump on popular trends. Instead, they were driven by a singular vision that refused to bend to the whims of a changing entertainment world. His films were always about more than just entertainment. They were reflections on society, morality, and the human condition. Whether in The Unforgiven, where he explored the cost of violence, or Million Dollar Baby, which examined themes of redemption and personal sacrifice, Eastwood's films never shied away from tough, complicated questions. Today, in a Hollywood landscape often dominated by spectacle and fantasy, Eastwood's uncompromising commitment to telling stories that mattered still holds great weight. For modern filmmakers, his legacy serves as a stark contrast to the pressure of instant gratification in the industry. Eastwood's films, though not flashy or designed for quick viral success, are defined by their depth and substance. His work reminds directors and writers alike that storytelling is not a race to appease the masses, but a measured and deliberate craft, one that values substance over style and depth over surface-level engagement. Even as Eastwood's public presence fades, his impact is felt in the work of the directors he inspired. The restraint and emotional complexity of his films can be seen in the works of contemporary filmmakers like Paul Thomas Anderson, Quentin Tarantino, and Christopher Nolan, who have all cited Eastwood as an influence. Like Eastwood, these directors balance broad appeal with thoughtful commentary, taking the time to develop characters and narratives that unfold with purpose, rather than relying on visual spectacle or quick-witted dialogue. Eastwood's influence is not limited to directors alone. His approach to acting, directing, and storytelling has shaped generations of actors, many of whom find themselves drawn to the quiet strength and moral ambiguity that Eastwood so often portrayed in his own performances. Actors like Morgan Freeman, Clint's longtime collaborator, and Matt Damon, who starred in Invictus, have followed in his footsteps by bringing a sense of depth and authenticity to their roles. It's a form of acting that focuses on the quiet moments, the pauses, the unspoken gestures, and the stillness that conveys more than words ever could. In many ways, Clint Eastwood's films have become a masterclass in restraint. It's a lesson that many of today's filmmakers have been forced to learn the hard way, that sometimes less is more. With the advent of rapid-fire editing, quick cuts, and special effects dominating modern blockbusters, it can be easy to forget the power of silence. Yet, in films like Gran Torino, The Bridges of Madison County, and Letters from Iwo Jima, Eastwood has shown that the most powerful moments are often the ones that allow for pause, the moments where the characters' thoughts are more important than their actions. And the film gives the audience space to reflect on the weight of each moment. In today's industry, where studio executives often push for films that can fit within a certain genre or marketing strategy, Eastwood's commitment to creating films that didn't follow the standard formula is all the more remarkable. Even as the world of cinema was changing around him, he stuck to his guns. His films were personal statements, ones that reflected his view of the world and his understanding of what it meant to be human. His refusal to adapt to industry trends speaks volumes about his dedication to his craft. He wasn't concerned with being the loudest or the most talked about. He simply wanted to make the films that felt true to him. This commitment to truth, in both his films and his personal philosophy, has set Eastwood apart in an era where so many are caught up in the noise. In an industry that constantly demands more content, more posts, more attention, Eastwood's absence is a powerful reminder that it is not the number of appearances or the frequency of statements that makes a legacy, but the substance of the work itself. As the industry continues to evolve, Eastwood's example remains a beacon for anyone who believes in the power of storytelling to transcend the noise. His films, often unflinching in their depiction of humanity, have stood the test of time because they do not seek to be immediately loved or understood. They challenge their audience, ask difficult questions, and ultimately leave the answers up to the viewer. Today's directors, actors, and creatives are faced with an increasingly fragmented entertainment world. With the rise of streaming platforms and the overwhelming tide of media, there is an unprecedented pressure to stay relevant, to create content that can be consumed quickly and then forgotten just as fast. Yet, Clint Eastwood's work reminds us that artistry doesn't need to be rushed, doesn't need to be consumed in one sitting, and certainly doesn't need to be praised immediately to be effective. True art, as Eastwood's films prove, is something that lingers. It's something that stays with you long after the credits roll. As Clint Eastwood's final message rings out, we are reminded that his work will continue to inspire and challenge audiences long into the future. His films, his philosophy, and his approach to filmmaking are not tied to any particular time or place. They are timeless because they speak to something universal in all of us: the complexities of life, the depths of human nature, and the power of silence. As Clint Eastwood's career fades into the annals of Hollywood history, his influence continues to stretch beyond the confines of the screen. It is not simply his films that have left a lasting impact. It is his approach to filmmaking, his philosophy of restraint, and the way he navigated the industry that will endure. Even in his quiet departure, Eastwood has left behind a legacy that will not fade with time, but rather grow, evolving to inspire future generations of filmmakers and artists. One of the key aspects of Eastwood's lasting influence is his ability to shape the narrative around his own work. Unlike many of his contemporaries, Eastwood did not rely on the crutch of media attention or constant self-promotion to keep his name relevant. In a world that is increasingly obsessed with visibility, Eastwood's silence stands as a testament to the power of simply doing the work. He didn't need to be the loudest voice in the room. His films spoke for themselves, and in a way, they still do. In the digital age, where social media and online platforms dominate the conversation, Clint Eastwood's approach is almost revolutionary. He understood that fame was fleeting, that trends come and go, but the substance of one's work can stand the test of time. His films are timeless, not because they are relics of the past, but because they speak to universal truths that continue to resonate today. Whether it's the themes of redemption in Gran Torino, the morality of violence in Unforgiven, or the deep sense of loss and forgiveness in Million Dollar Baby, Eastwood's films tackle the complexities of the human experience in a way that transcends the moment in which they were made. This is perhaps the most significant aspect of Eastwood's legacy: his refusal to conform to the ever-changing demands of the industry. While many filmmakers adjust their style to suit the taste of the time, Eastwood stayed true to his own vision. His films were always a reflection of his worldview, not a response to external pressures. In a time when franchises and sequels dominate the box office, Eastwood's films were often singular and self-contained, requiring no continuation or explanation. This self-sufficiency in his work allowed for deeper, more meaningful storytelling, where the characters and narratives weren't bound by the need for constant expansion. Eastwood's approach to filmmaking was also rooted in a deep understanding of the medium. He was not a director who relied heavily on flashy special effects or the spectacle of modern cinema. Instead, he understood the power of simplicity, of letting a scene unfold naturally, allowing the actors and the dialogue to carry the weight of the story. This approach has influenced countless filmmakers, especially those who are trying to bring back the art of storytelling that focuses on character and emotional depth rather than visual stimulation. Directors like Noah Baumbach, Alexander Payne, and even Martin Scorsese have all cited Eastwood as an influence in how they approach the delicate balance between style and substance. In many ways, Clint Eastwood is the embodiment of the idea that filmmaking is not just about creating a product, but about expressing a vision. He was never interested in conforming to industry trends or producing films simply for the sake of entertainment. His films were expressions of his own experiences, philosophies, and views of the world. This authenticity has resonated with audiences for decades, and it is this authenticity that continues to make his films relevant even today. Eastwood's refusal to chase trends also speaks to his commitment to the craft of filmmaking. In a world where streaming platforms have changed the way films are consumed, and where content is often driven by algorithms and viewer preferences, Eastwood's commitment to making the films he wanted to make is an act of rebellion. He chose to follow his own path, even when that path diverged from the mainstream. And in doing so, he set an example for younger filmmakers who may feel pressured to conform to industry expectations. At the same time, Eastwood's influence isn't confined to directors and filmmakers alone. His impact on actors is equally profound. Eastwood's career has demonstrated that great acting is not about playing to the camera, but about embodying a character's internal struggles and complexities. His films often feature characters who are morally ambiguous, individuals who are not defined by simple good or evil, but by their actions, regrets, and internal conflicts. This complexity has drawn some of the greatest actors of the modern era, including Morgan Freeman, Hilary Swank, and Matt Damon, who all delivered career-defining performances under Eastwood's direction. By creating characters who were more than just archetypes, Eastwood elevated the craft of acting, urging his performers to dig deeper into their roles and bring forth a raw, unfiltered portrayal of the human experience. This approach has influenced a generation of actors who seek to bring depth and authenticity to their performances, even in films where the characters may be more straightforward. Looking ahead, the legacy of Clint Eastwood's approach to filmmaking will continue to serve as a touchstone for future generations. As the film industry evolves, as technology continues to change the way movies are made and consumed, Eastwood's work will remain a reminder of the power of quiet, deliberate storytelling. His films are not designed to be disposable. They're built to last, to challenge the viewer, and to provoke thought long after the credits roll. The world of cinema may have changed since Eastwood first began his career, but his influence will continue to shape it for years to come. He may no longer be at the helm of a film set, but his approach to storytelling, his dedication to authenticity, and his unwavering commitment to the craft will remain a guiding light for anyone who seeks to create art that matters. Clint Eastwood's legacy is not defined by his final message, but by the body of work he leaves behind, a body of work that will continue to inspire filmmakers and audiences for generations to come.